Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to Followers of the Wave Radio, Season 2, Year of the Rising Phoenix Dragons. That theme came through, I think, yesterday, and I like it, so we're going to stick with that for the radio show theme this year. And welcome to this season. We're going to be broadcasting for now, at blogtalkradio.com/FOTWAY, Fotway, and look forward to having you join us for some amazing adventures as we're raising our own consciousness and raising consciousness with those amazing people who we connect with this season, and this season being a big one. And today we have an amazing guest as well. It's going to be a really neat show. So I'd first like to introduce our co-host. How are you doing today, Rhonda?
Hi, Michael. I'm doing great, and it's an exciting night. We have a wonderful speaker, and we're going to have a great discussion. I just know this is going to be fabulous.
Yeah, well, today we're going to be chatting with Andrew Basiago, and Andrew has a different kind of resume than most people that you know, and has come out as one of the essentially whistleblowers or brave men and women who have shared stories that really stretch the human imagination even, and yet have truth in them that starts to bring that kind of imagination into reality. And today we're going to be talking literally about time and space, about timelines, about time travel, and about space travel. And all of these things, of course, are talked about plenty in sci-fi movies, or perhaps NASA talks about space travel, but not in the way that we're going to be talking about today, and perhaps not in the way that's actually happening in our world right now in some of these organizations like NASA. What's really going on, and how does that affect us? What's real in this world, and why is that important? So I guess we'll just get right into the show here, and we'll introduce our guest for today, Andrew Basiago. How are you doing today, Andrew?
Excellent, Michael. Good to be with you. Hi, Rhonda.
Hi, Michael. And hi, Andrew. I'm so glad that you joined us tonight.
Good to be with both of you.
Yeah, Andrew, so I think you're near me. You're in Vancouver, Washington. Is that correct?
Correct. I live in Vancouver, and I practice law throughout the state of Washington.
Oh, okay, great. Well, I'm near the Portland area for now, so a bit of a neighbor. And Ron is out there in Texas, and good to be here with you today on the radio for the first time.
Well, I'm happy to be here.
So I reached out to you, Andrew, on Facebook, and you have a Project Pegasus group there, which has got a lot of interesting conversation going back and forth based on some of the information you've been releasing here over the past, how long has it been? Has it been about a couple years now, or how long have you been releasing information about your childhood experiences and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I first started investigating my experiences, my childhood experiences in the early 1970s in DARPA's Project Pegasus around the year 2000. I was 39, going on 40, and sort of evaluating my life. I first began speaking publicly about my experiences here in the Northwest in 2004. And I would say that my truth campaign has accelerated in the last 3 years. 2009, 10, and 11 have been so busy for me that I haven't even put the results of my activities up on my website yet. So my time is not my own at this point. So it sort of went vertical in 2009. So I have a good more than 10 years of investigation into my experiences, and I'm at the point where, originally I just wanted to go back and explore what happened so that I could understand what happened and share it with others. And in the process, what I had hoped I would accomplish, the second goal was to find others who would corroborate my experiences. And in fact, that's already happened. I now have 2 whistleblowers who, one has already come forward, that's William Stillings. There's a second whistleblower that of even greater magnitude who will be coming forward this spring, literally in the next several months. He was actually the investigator of of the jump room program for the intelligence community. He was the individual that was dropped into the program to investigate it and determine what domain in time space we were accessing with that particular time travel technology. So, for those who say that I've built my whole public career on mere allegations, that's not true. I've provided eyewitness testimony involving hundreds of facts regarding direct first-hand experience, which you're undoubtedly aware in the law, that's admissible as direct evidence. But now I have the testimony of others. And so my truth campaign establishing that the U.S. government developed a time-space exploration capability in the early 70s, and by 1980 was doing extremely advanced things with it, is well along at this point. I already have others who have come forward to corroborate what I've been discussing publicly.
Uh-huh.
Absolutely.
Andrew, I have a question for you. When did you first start to remember that this had happened in your childhood? Because I know you mentioned that in some of your previous radio shows that your memory, they did try to erase your memory about these incidents, and yet somehow you managed to retrieve them. When did that first start to happen?
Right, that's a very good question, and it's actually very complex in epistemological terms regarding my own understanding of what happened. I was involved in Project Pegasus roughly from around age 6 to 11. My first teleportation from New Jersey to New Mexico was during my 6th year. I was officially dropped into Project Pegasus at the beginning of 3rd grade. I was 7 going on age 8 in the fall of 1969. And I was involved until the end of the summer of 72, with several hidden summers worked into those years. I never forgot those childhood experiences, notwithstanding the fact that at the end of the childhood set of secret activities, what I've been describing is that there was an attempt made to suppress my memories via brainwashing. We had never been placed under mind control per se in the project because, in fact, they wanted us to be as spontaneous as possible when we were time traveling. I mean, they were relying on the integrity of our cognitive skills, our perception, our memory, our ability to describe back what we had experienced when we were engaged in different forms of quantum access. So what I was describing regarding my childhood experiences is that an attempt was made to brainwash me and suppress what happened, but I resisted in that actual brainwashing session. It was actually an induction of pain. I'm going to describe it in my book. It was pretty horrific. It would certainly today violate the torture convention. Let me say that. But what I was describing is that I overcame that when it was happening. Okay, so I was talking about being subject to brainwashing and defeating it. Okay, so I brought my childhood time travel experiences all the way forward. I remember there are different incidents where I described them to my junior high, high school, and college friends. I believe even some of my law school friends up here in the Northwest. Then I had a relatively normal junior high, high school, and first year of college, and then the government came calling again and dropped me into the jump room program, which I was active in when I was an undergraduate at UCLA. That would be from summer of 1980 to roughly the end of the spring of 1983. Those experiences remained compartmentalized in my mind and not available to my conscious mind for 30 years. It was only after William Stillings contacted me in February of 2010, after he heard me on Coast to Coast AM in November of 2009, that as a result of interacting with Brett, we were able to basically jog loose the compartmentalization of memory that was induced shortly after our training in the summer of 1980. And so I even wrote my landmark paper about life on Mars, entitled The Discovery of Life on Mars, with my personal Mars experiences blocked. And we now have another whistleblower coming forward. He has a slightly different interpretation of what happened. And so actually our own understanding of what the jump room program involved is going to become more complex. But I acknowledge that that second set of activities, which began at age 18 and continued through my early 20s when I was in college at UCLA in Los Angeles, they remain blocked. And that shows you how sophisticated the government's ability to suppress somebody's memories was by 1980, 81, 82, 83. However, the interaction between Brett Stillings and I shows that when you take two people from the same program who had similar experiences and we're subjected to the same sort of compartmentalization of memory, somehow they do an end run around the memory blocks, and we've recaptured much of what happened in the program. So ultimately, my story is a very hopeful one. It's not a mind control account. It's the account of somebody who was involved directly in the early days of time-space exploration by the U.S. government, and it's really a story about the triumph of the human spirit in the sense that one individual overcame that form of duress and is now able to tell the tale, and that's what I'm doing.
Hmm.
Michael, I thought you were going to say something. I don't hear you.
Yeah. Yes, sorry. Thank you. Yeah, I've been listening to some of your the interviews you've done on YouTube or with some other people there on YouTube, Andrew, and they're certainly worth listening to, so I encourage our listeners of this show to check them out. They're very detailed in terms of the details of your history and, like you were talking about, the many, many facts that are involved with this release of information. And one thing I liked about one of the interviews I was just listening to recently is I think you were saying it was your spiritual understanding and your going within that really gave you the strength to maintain awareness and memory as a child, even that this was a part of your journey as a child, and that's something we wanted to touch on today.
Very much so. I mean, I consciously remember that as a child I was telling myself, "You're not going to forget this. You're not going to forget this." And in fact, during one teleporting to Santa Fe, I had an encounter with a boy my age who was in the program, who lived down the street, who went to the primary grades of grammar school a short distance from our homes, literally through the woods and down the street and through the woods to the school grounds, and was also enrolled in Sunday school with me at a local Catholic parish. And I had an encounter with him, I believe it was in the 5th grade, that would be 70, 71, where we practically collided with each other running around the corner of the Baton Memorial Building in Santa Fe. And if any of your listeners have the opportunity to visit that beautiful city, if you visit the Baton Memorial Building, which is the pre-1966 State Capitol building, right near the Roundhouse, which is the current Capitol building, there's a distinctive bell tower atop that building that provides a visual hallmark or landmark for the entire city of Santa Fe. And so they were trying to send us there, and if we didn't pop into view after teleporting to Santa Fe directly, in the immediate vicinity of that building, we had been trained to find that building wherever we arrived in Santa Fe. So I turned the corner of that building and practically ran into this individual, Kevin. I don't want to give his last name. I have spoken with him, by the way, and he did remember the teleportation experiences. But Kevin insisted that he wasn't Kevin, he was Scott. Now, in the area of trying to control us, they had us select an alternate first name, and they were always calling us by that first name in the program. I don't think you can say they induced multiple personality, but they just tried to distance our own understanding from our experiences by giving us an alternate name. And I was quite disconcerted as we were driving from Santa Fe to the small town of Lamy near Santa Fe as a result of the fact that Kevin was telling me that he wasn't Kevin, he was Scott. And so when it really sunk in that my other peers were being brainwashed to forget their involvement, and I was understanding, myself, that Andy was in these experiences, I memorized 3 place names on Cerrillos Road, which is Highway 14 there, which links the I-25 corridor with the New Mexico State Capitol grounds. And there were 3 distinctive commercial establishments on Cerrillos Road that we would always pass on the way to I-25 to go up to the small town of Lamy to be tested. We were always given a physical exam and then cognitively tested with sort of SAT-type math and verbal problems every time we teleported to Santa Fe. They were trying to ascertain the mental and physical effects of teleportation on children. That was one of the programmatic goals that they had. And so I remembered the place names. I intentionally placed in the back of my mind the place names King's Rest, Thunderbird Motel, and Village Inn. Those were 2 hotels that, actually the Village Inn is a restaurant, but those were three commercial establishments on Cerrillos Road. Well, when I went back to Santa Fe the first time at age 41 in June of 2003, in that distance between the Santa Fe State Capitol grounds and I-25, those were the three remaining commercial establishments from the early 70s that were still in existence in that 5 miles of roadway there. So that was part of the attempt I made as a child not to be manipulated and to remember what was happening. And I did that because now I have a comprehensive understanding of what happened to me during the early days of time-space exploration by the U.S. government in Project Pegasus. So I kind of remember the cipher that gave it reality, In other words, I remember the visual hallmarks in Santa Fe because they were evidence that I could place in my mind to bring forward in time and verify when I went back to Santa Fe. I didn't get back to Santa Fe when I thought I would. I thought I'd go back, let's say, when I was 21. But I ended up going back there in my early 40s and finding the hallmarks that I had memorized.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And certainly, I guess for all of us, it's good to always remember, no matter what's happening with us, that there's always a way, if we in tune, if we find that inner strength to remember and to know who we are and to make the right choices in whatever situations we're facing. What I'd love to cover a little bit, just briefly if we can, is I'm curious about all the different types of technology. Obviously, we can't go into detail on them. I just want to get a brief overview of the different sort of time travel, space travel phases that you went through and projects that you were a part of, or technologies that were used, because I think some of them were going in. First of all, I think some of them were reviewing past events potentially, and just you could not interfere. It was not actually traveling; it was reviewing. Then some of them were actually traveling into the past, where you were actually present in a situation in the physical, and then some of them were going into future, but it was a potential future, and it was more of a viewing of the future, and perhaps some you were actually there. So I'd just like to clarify what the different types of technology, or at least experiences that you had, and how those you could actually affect change in any of those. Can we go over those?
Just kind of let me just sort of cover the spectrum. They basically stretched from conventional remote viewing, which of course would be a psychic form of time travel, all the way to physically visiting the future via advanced teleporters called Stargates. So let me just describe the 8 forms of time travel, because Project Pegasus really wasn't a time travel program per se. Time travel was being researched and developed by DARPA because it was tasked to create a remote sensing in time capability for the Central Intelligence Agency. So we were doing everything from conventional remote viewing, where we were trained to send our mind to a distant location in space and also in time-space, with an offset time-wise. So we were having exercises where we simply were being guided through remote viewing sessions, what Ed Dames would go on to call technical remote viewing. Although I use that term for where you're actually interfacing with technology to perform remote viewing. So the most basic form of time travel was remote viewing. They then began spinning us on our backs on a tabletop-like device to induce out-of-body experiences, to train us to go out of body at will. And I describe that as a form of astral time travel. What distinguishes that from remote viewing is you're not viewing ordinary quantum environments. You are viewing astral environments. You're literally going out of body and out of the ordinary time-space environment that you're accustomed to, in the manner that you do, let's say, when you're sleeping at night and you're involved in lucid dreaming. Then, after we, beg your pardon?
That's using technology, is that, Andrew? The out-of-body astral traveling, was it?
Oh no, that was just essentially an occultic art. They were showing us how when they were first spinning us at 33 RPM clockwise on our backs, and that induces an OBE, and then we were learned how to basically just spontaneously go out of body. And that set off a set of spontaneous OBEs sort of for me in the morning when I was waking up. I would actually go out of body before waking up in the early morning for several years after that. Then they began placing us in the Montauk chair, and that's the principal time travel technology that's focused in the Montauk accounts that we find in the series of books by Preston Nichols and Peter Moon. It's what Stuart Swerdlow was involved in. The Montauk chair is essentially a magnetic transducer that creates a magnetic field around the individual sitting in the chair. And what I experienced during our several years in that chair was going forward in time and actually pre-experiencing moments in my own subjective future. So that would be, let's say, inducing out-of-body experiences where you go to your literal future and live it. Not see it, but live it. The Montauk chair was known to be able to do that, but it wasn't certain how it was doing that. In other words, the magnetic transduction was understood to either be affecting our own pre-memories of the future that were in our brains at birth, or it was believed possibly they were affecting waves or time waves out in our environment and enabling us to perceive those time waves and hence understand what our future held. So those were out-of-body experiences followed by, let's say, 15 to 20 minutes of actual lived future experience. And I think the reason that was spun off into Project Montauk after Project Pegasus concluded is because it was an extremely accurate and safe form of time travel. The individual's body stayed back in the Montauk chair, but certainly in my case it was shown, and presumably in the case of other experiencers, that the data that we were retrieving from the future was highly accurate. Not only personal data, but historical data that was retrieved by discussing what we saw when we were visiting our futures and then searching collaterally for clues as to what was going on in society. You know, okay, the television set was on. Who was on the television? Oh, the president was on the TV. Who was the president? What was he talking about? Okay, so we would be debriefed after pre-experiencing these moments in our own subjective future. Then in the summer of 1970, they began training us in Tesla teleportation. That was the fourth form of time travel. And we were going up to the Curtiss Wright Aeronautical Company facility in Woodridge, New Jersey. I had been taken up there by my late father in 1967-68 time frame, but this is now summer of 70. We finished third grade and are going into the fourth grade there at our public elementary school in north central New Jersey. And there was two parenthesis-shaped booms or armatures sitting on the floor of one of the shops there at Curtiss Wright. And when the device was turned on, there was a field of radiant energy that Tesla had discovered. And we were jumping through that field of energy. We then found ourselves in a vortal tunnel in time-space, sort of a tunnel of light with moving walls, where if we looked to our left or right, we could see a multiplicity of intervening events going on holographically. And then we saw a light at the end of the tunnel. The light approached us very quickly, and then we found footfall wherever the tunnel closed. And for the most part, they were using that device to put us down as close as possible to the bell tower there at the Baton Memorial Building in Santa Fe. And in fact, several of my own arrivals there via Tesla teleportation were detected by people in that environment. I mean, I had confrontations with native Santa Feans upon teleporting to their wonderful city. And then we would be involved in project activities in New Mexico, and then we would be taken by car to the Sandia National Labs in Sandia, New Mexico, which is northeast of Albuquerque, adjacent to the Kirtland Air Force Base, and jump through an identical device and find footfall back on the tarmac at Curtiss Wright. So I had about maybe 40 of those experiences. They were acclimating us in being sent elsewhere, either in real time to another location in time-space or with some adjustment in time, but they could only go back in time to time after the advent of the teleporter, or they would strand us in the past. So they were only using that for short hops within the quantum ambit of the program itself. Then in fall of 70, they introduced us to devices called chronovisors, which are electro-optical devices that propagate a hologram of a past or future event that you can either look at externally from the hologram and see what was going on, or see what is going on in the past or future, or if you're placed in the hologram when it's turned on, you experience spontaneously being sent to that quantum environment, and you interact with it in sort of a physio-virtual way. The paradox was we were told that we were only going to be a spectral presence in those environments, but if we stayed in for more than 15 minutes, a density effect occurred, and we were physically in those past and future times. And they then had to put a portal into the hologram to extract us. And then there were several more advanced technologies. There was an advanced Stargate, which was basically a very elaborate, very large Tesla teleporter that they were using to send us to the far future. And I was also involved in a probe to the day that Lincoln gave the Gettysburg Address in an emergent technology called plasma confinement, in which you entered a chamber where plasma was under confinement, and they were able to create a localized quantum field effect around the time traveler that basically inserted them into a past event, and then when that effect wore off, we spontaneously returned back to the chamber. So I really got a personal experience as these technologies, either they had already emerged and they were being tested on children, or some of them indeed were actually new and dangerous and experimental technologies, and they were emerging, and they were using us because we were, literally the time travelers of the future. We were the group of American school children that they were training to become the next generation of chrononauts.
And these school children were, I understand you were the son of a military family. Is that correct? Both your parents were in the military?
No,
what was
no. Indeed. My mother didn't serve in the military ever during her life. My father had been a private first class. He was a combat medic and ambulance driver with the 13th Airborne Division, having served in France and Germany during World War II. But during the Cold War, like many engineers and others working on secret defense projects, my dad had a rank with the Army, what was called the Second Reserve. And that was a secret phalanx of basically ordinary Americans, engineers, school principals, doctors, lawyers, who held secret military rank and were going to step up and become our frontline political and military leadership in the event that we were invaded, and our political and military leadership was either executed or imprisoned. So they were sort of a fifth column that would step up and try to retake the country if we were overwhelmed by a foreign power. So that also obviously served the function of allowing my father to get on and off of military bases where a lot of these projects were ongoing without having to be cleared as a civilian. So he held the rank of Army Major in the Second Reserve. I think it's more accurate to say that my father was a respected engineer working for the Ralph M. Parsons Company, who had worked on secret aerospace projects going back to the ramjet engine project at Curtiss-Wright, which took place between 1952 and 55. So my dad was really aligned with the Technical Services Support Division of the CIA. He had been doing secret technical studies for the CIA, the Navy, the Air Force, and other alphabet intelligence agencies from 1952, initially in response to the July 1952 overflight of Washington, D.C., by 9 UFOs clocked at 7,000 miles per hour at the Langley Air Force Base. So my dad was, a post-war, post-Roswell, post-1952 engineer working on advanced aerospace projects for a variety of companies, so that by the time that Project Pegasus was assembled in the late 60s, he had an extensive understanding not only of electrical engineering and chemical and instrumentation engineering, but in the math and physics associated with flight, and hence readily graduated into being able to do the calculations associated with time-space displacement. And that was sort of his entree into the time travel program.
Andrew,
Okay.
would you say that your father was a spiritual man? Was he interested in any of the spiritual concepts ascension or any of those concepts, or was he pretty
No,
much?
My father was a man of great strength and high integrity. He was a very responsible and beloved son. I mean, he was the one child out of 11 that always made sure regarding my grandmother's well-being. He was a very responsible husband and father. He was a very devout Catholic, like many people affiliated with the CIA in those years. He was from a very disadvantaged background. He had grown up in rural Pennsylvania during the Great Depression. In fact, when he was age 10, he was born in 1923, so when the Depression ensued, my father was literally, semi-starving during the Depression. He had been born on the kitchen table in a small coal mining town in Pennsylvania. So he was a first-generation American. He really believed in family. He was proud to be an American. He had seen how a strong, responsible defense policy by the United States was in the interest of the world as a veteran of World War II. And he involved himself, and he allowed me to be involved. I don't think it's really fair to say that he had a choice, but he with me, he tried to emphasize the great gift we were being given by being able to do and see the things that we were doing and seeing. And also, we were both sort of proud that we were serving American civilization during its initial forays into time-space. So we were very aware that we were involved in something that was good for the country, that would advance the cause of science and applied science in our time, and we were having a great adventure. So I don't think it's fair to say that he was a spiritual man as we would define it today, but I'm sure that people will understand when my story is ultimately told that my father is really one of the heroes of the story. He believed in God, himself, his son, the United States, the fact that if we could master time-space, we could use it to advantage humanity, and that there were real threats that the country was confronted with in the Cold War that required a time-space capability. They had two major concerns. I speak of them as the grays and the reds, basically the extraterrestrials that had begun visiting our planet in greater and greater numbers after we began detonating atomic bombs from 1944 forward. And they were also concerned about the reds. They were actually concerned about a land invasion of the lower 48 by the Soviet Army and Navy. So my father was a man of integrity who was doing what I think all good people would do if faced with the set of circumstances that he was faced with. So it's easy to note that he involved his son in the kind of new, dangerous, and experimental activities that indeed I was involved in. But at the same time, he knew that, look, if humanity was going to become a time-space faring species, they were going to have to take their children with them. And while I was being subjected to greater risks, similar risks had occurred when children were taken aboard airplanes during the advent of flight. In fact, when we discussed this one time, he said, well, think about when primitive humans had to leave an island or an area of the land where, let's say, they had to go to better hunting grounds or there was a volcanic eruption that threatened the whole tribe. The adults put their children on their backs and forded rivers. I mean, in other words, children go where their parents go. And so it was a very special thing that my dad and I shared. It wasn't as if he was inducing a set of unpleasant experiences. We were involved in high adventure together, not only on the plains of New Mexico, but literally on the plains of time-space. And that's one of the things I'm going to try to bring forward in my book and really celebrate, because I really cherish those memories of having these special experiences with my father.
And, the spiritual aspect is something we definitely wanted to cover today. And there's also, I'd love to go through the different details of the project. And, there's a lot here. So one of the things we wanted to cover a little bit was an understanding. I actually wrote down all the different items you shared. And there's 8 different kinds of travel we were talking about here. that I got anyway out of that. And I understand that in some cases you were traveling into potential futures, for example, that part of the United States was underwater, or there was some kind of very negative future. Is that true, or was there some chronovisor viewing? And chronovisors, again, are the viewing of particular potential futures and that kind of thing. Were there some times where things would be viewed that were not the kind of future we would want to be living in? What are some examples of that?
Well, there was one catastrophic future that we did technically remote view by literally going there, at least in a physio-virtual way or a paraphysical way. I was one of the children who participated in a chronovisor probe to the year 2013 that was undertaken at the ITT Defense Communications Facility in Nutley, New Jersey on November 5th of 1971. I was able to go back and actually ascertain the date because throughout the fall of 1971 they were training us at Curtiss-Wright for a probe to the future that they were telling us would take place during the first Friday in November, which is, I went back and discerned that was November 5th of 1971. And we were placed on a very large stage in titanium-covered jumpsuits that were very much like spacesuits with a crystal helmet and so forth. And a belt was placed around our waists that was fastened to a post on the stage. And rather than having a bright light come on that displaced us to a past event, this much larger chronovisor actually induced an experience where we found ourselves going forward, physically moving forward. And I really can't, it's hard to describe the environment. It was sort of like space, but it was sort of like also what people report in the near-death experience. It was almost a misty environment. Perhaps that's what physicists have begun to call the quantum plenum. We were sort of going through a realm of pure potentiality, and that when we stopped at the limit of that trip, we had been trained up at Curtiss-Wright to look quickly to the left and right to see what we could see of the target that they were physically targeting at that time in the future. And what I saw was this immaculate marble building with columns that was under about 100 feet of brackish water. Because when they pulled us back, removed this bulky time-space suit, and we stepped out, and I was utterly soaked. In fact, they poured my boots out on the stage. And I was walked out of that room where the chronovisor was, down the hall, into a debriefing by a lieutenant commander attached to the Office of Naval Intelligence. We were always being debriefed by lieutenant commanders for ONI after the most important probes to the past or future. So in this instance, that LCDR for the Navy literally had an office down the hall from where that chronovisor array had been created, had been built. And when he asked me what I saw of the target, I said, "Sir, the target is underwater." And he got very, very agitated. He actually got up and started pacing his office and smoking after serving me some ice water that he actually, out of a glass pitcher that he actually spilled on his desk. And he said to me, "We finally figured out that these devices are causing fairly serious dehydration among the adults and even among the children and even some of the adults involved." So he spilled water on the table, and as I started to describe to him what I saw, he begins pacing, and he says, "Well, how do you know that?" And I said, "Well, you know that green stuff that forms in ponds? I could see that on the columns of the building." And it was a short debriefing. He just wanted to basically get a sense of what I had seen. I was then marched out of his office, dressed, dried off a little bit with a towel, and dressed, and I had a reuniting with my father there, and because I'd asked one of the facilitators when I was taken off the stage of the chronovisor, "Where's my dad?" Because my dad had shown up at that probe right as we entered the building in the afternoon, and one of the facilitators explained that he had to spend some time with himself, Andy, because you all disappeared. So what my father had seen is all of us literally disappear from the stage. He thought we had been killed or displaced in time-space permanently. So we finally reappear on the stage, and then we're debriefed. And what my dad later explained when we were driving home to Morris Plains, where we were living and where our home was that it was a probe to Washington at a time in the future where on one of the timelines there was a catastrophe, but he wouldn't be more forthcoming. So the next Monday or Tuesday when we met in the learning lab back at my elementary school, we used everything we could to try to get the team leaders to reveal what year it was and what the building was, and they finally relented and told us that the building was the U.S. Supreme Court building on the Mall in Washington, D.C. in the year 2013. But I always take pains to note that that chronovisor probe in fall of 1971 followed the shutting down of time travel to the past involving children in chronovisors in the summer of 1971. And I had actually been at the Sandia Auditorium when the announcement was made that they were shutting down the chronovisor probes to the past involving children because they were getting discrepant data. They were accessing similar but ultimately discrepant timelines. And so here there was an attempt to use chronovision to explore the future. So I always hasten to add that we know that that's what timeline I accessed when I was sent there, but we can't say dispositively that that's going to happen to the East Coast of the United States in 2013 because the chronovisors were known to be lensing different timelines and bringing them into the laboratory. It was sort of hit and miss as to whether you were going to get a hologram of the actual past on this timeline or the actual future on this time. Sometimes there was a displacement where we were getting a hologram of an adjacent timeline. So that may happen, but it may not. But at least we can say this. We can say that when the United States began to be involved in time-space exploration in the early 1970s, some of the data revealed a catastrophic future, and that explains why over the last 40 years the U.S. government has secretly spent trillions of dollars establishing a continuity of government program in the American Southwest. Now, that's either a great boondoggle or that's something that may cause some human beings to survive whatever catastrophe is going to occur. I think it's significant that something like 70% of all of humanity on Earth lives within a 1-hour car drive of an ocean. So I think we really need to explore whether it's sensible to place most of our metropolitan areas on coastlines. We may find ourselves living in a global Venice, a water world, if we have some kind of catastrophic event that raises the sea level of the world's oceans. But I'm not certain that that's going to happen in 2013. And you know something? When I think about all the wonderful people that live in the world on this timeline, I don't think that humanity deserves a catastrophic future. So my own sense of it is that we're not going to see that in 2013 on this timeline.
I totally agree. In fact, over the years, I have received sometimes a prophetic dream or just a vision of prophecy of some catastrophic event that's going to happen or could happen in the future. And in fact, I've seen wars that could happen. I've seen, floods and asteroids hitting and everything. And amazingly, after I see this, I pray about it. I give decrees about it, and other people do too. And these visions don't happen. The timeline, the potentiality that I witness and I view in these dreams, it doesn't come to pass. And so I have come to discover that all of our prophecies for the future, they can be mitigated, they can be changed. It doesn't have to be a reality that we experience. So that's the feeling I get, too, about your future vision. And here we have a government that's spending billions of dollars trying to save itself, and certain people who are so afraid for their lives that they're going to all this trouble to save their lives because they believe this catastrophe is going to happen. And yet, I think, a lot of this really isn't going to happen because we're on a different timeline. We're on a timeline of the ascension. That's the time I'm on. I'm on a timeline that's moving us forward in the light, and they're on a timeline of fear. So their fear is taking them down a different timeline than what my love timeline of ascension is taking me.
Absolutely, and there's also the ethical dimension of what we choose to believe or we choose to apprehend about the future. If we don't get focused in fear, but we remain focused in love, we then ask ourselves, well, how should our federal dollars be spent? Should they be spent preparing a survival civilization on some second or third sumo level of probability, or should they be spent in the immediate ministration to people who are in need of food, in need of shelter, in need of health care, in need of education, in need of employment? I mean, if you're talking about trillions of dollars, which is what indeed, right now, I mean, I just saw a figure. The United States defense budget is 59% of our budget, of our federal budget. So we've become a warrior nation that has been secretly involved in potentially wasting trillions of dollars that could have been spent in direct service to other human beings in need. And so if we want to create a benevolent future rather than a malevolent one, let's start thinking about how we spend our resources so that we deserve a more beneficent future. So that's one of the reasons I'm speaking out ethically, is because I was let in, to what James Bamford called that puzzle palace. And I could see the great resources that were being spent on, for example, the survival infrastructure in the Southwest. I thought, my God, we have, 20 to 25% of American children living in poverty. 50% of our homeless are Vietnam veterans who became permanently dislocated from a worthwhile life. And we're not even going to the homeless and saying, look, can I get you shelter? Can I find you employment? Can I feed you? But we're secretly spending massive resources to create a survival cadre of the privileged. That's immoral, and I think that we have to confront that as a country.
Yeah, and what a key that we can view these potential futures. And one thing, for example, WebBot is something that a project online that has predicted certain things are going to happen. It's kind of like a prophecy machine of some sort. And I know that one of the things it predicted was that you, Andrew Basiago, would be a planetary whistleblower. Basiago, sorry. And then it also predicted a lot of negative kind of prophecies as well. And we have kept to break through these potentially negative times and dates that things could and would happen, supposedly. And these prophecies have come through a lot of spiritual people in the past, a lot of channeling, a lot of different activity. And yet there is that law that prophecy is given so that it can be mitigated. And when we know the potential negative, we can turn that around. And that starts within us. So we're here about what the government's doing with these trillions and trillions of dollars, and these time travel programs, and who knows what else. Because you're talking about technology that is 30 years old now, 40 years old now, and what's really going on with it nowadays. I mean, it's already blowing imagination 40 years ago. So what's this all about, and where is the power? I mean, how can we as a people actually have an influence on where our world is going when we have a government that is taking all of this money and putting it into all of these hardened military projects? And to me, that's really the key, is that the truth sets us free, and the kingdom of heaven even is within us. So the power is within for this change to happen, regardless of the billions and trillions of dollars that may be used by the system to create a more hardened world, a more hardened consciousness, and create a dualistic world. But it's really up to us to be the ones to bring forth the shift within ourselves. And as we do, then the outer starts to lose its power. We start to take back our power and stop giving it away to a system that is obviously sucking our light, essentially, for its own nefarious purposes. And, I mean, what do you think? And Andrew, you were saying that in the beginning of this activities, you felt pretty good about being a patriot, essentially, for moving forward the cause of the United States. Maybe it did have some benefit. That being said, it's 40 years later, and we haven't heard of any of this technology being released publicly at all. And so really is continue to be a military technology. So what do you think they're doing with these kind of things nowadays, and what's the game plan?
Well, yeah, you've asked several questions, so let me tackle them in seriatim. Cliff High's identification of myself as a planetary whistleblower was actually very mysterious, because he did it, using his ALTA paradigm, his asymmetrical linguistic trend analysis, which really is a massive content analysis of the of the Internet. And what was really strange about the prediction is he said that a planetary whistleblower would emerge who would make a major disclosure about extraterrestrial life, and that presumably was my publication of my landmark paper on life on Mars in 2008 entitled The Discovery of Life on Mars. But then he continued and said this individual would offer something to sort of the economic paralysis of the United States. And I don't think that merely advocating the declassification and deployment of teleportation is that, but I think what that prediction went to, that prophecy fulfilled, so to speak, was that what I've been advocating in my truth campaign is that we begin to think about addressing our economic stagnation and our lack of general prosperity in the population by engaging in technology transfer from the secret to the public realm. Because look, trillions of our tax dollars have been spent on developing technologies that, if made public, would revolutionize the infrastructure of society. There's been a 65-year cover-up of the application, for example, of Tesla technology for both energy production and for transportation via teleportation. So I think that important historical leverage point, that historical threshold that we need to cross, is what Cliff was identifying, and that's the torch that I've been trying to hold high. Now, in practical terms, what I believe we have to do, and this is why I've decided to run for president in 2016, we need to basically put somebody who will do that in the White House. The other extrapolations of my experiences, both in Project Pegasus and the later Jump Room program, I think I don't think we have the time tonight to discuss those, but they reveal that essentially the political dilemma that we're in is that the presidency has been captured by the CIA. The last 4 presidents have been career CIA operatives. I'm speaking of Bush, Clinton, Bush, Obama. And I have personal direct information that can show why that's the case. But until we put iconoclastic leadership in the White House, the kind of leadership that was provided by President John Fitzgerald Kennedy, we're not going to be able to move the United States forward so that we exercise a leadership role in defining how we're going to modernize society in the 21st century. And so clearly some of these technologies are already being implemented by the military-industrial complex. Probably teleportation is being used secretly to move executive branch officials around military bases around the world. I mean, we have a military base in every country of the world practically. And we also know that advanced holography has been used as a military weapon. When I was in the program and the defense attaché to Project Pegasus, Donald Rumsfeld, spoke to us as a group of child teleportees, he said that the primary purpose of teleportation was military. It would allow the U.S. Army to put troops precisely where they were needed on the battlefield. I believe that was a serious historical mistake. I believe the chief significance of teleportation is to move people between distant points on the face of our planet with a minimal input of energy, time, and with maximum outcomes in terms of safety, efficiency, low cost, and so forth. So what I hope to achieve is a situation in which the truth movement evolves into a broadly based movement like the civil rights movement or the abolition movement or the suffrage movement. And we place either myself or some other individual from the truth movement in the White House so we can then use the presidency as an agenda lever for bringing about the modernization of society that we need. And how are we going to achieve that modernization? Well, we already have the tools. The problem is that those instruments remain secret. And so disclosure actually becomes the cause that we all need to be involved in. Not just disclosure, the single issue focus on extraterrestrial life and whether or not it's been visiting Earth, but disclosure of everything that's being kept secret that shouldn't be because it doesn't meet the clear and present danger test. I'm not saying, for example, that information about how to build a thermonuclear warhead should be made public, but I believe the fact that we achieved teleportation 40 years ago should be. And so that's what I'm going to hope to achieve as president, is a liberalization of the government itself where we bring these secret technologies forward and we use the presidency and those technologies to transform society for the good.
You have a pretty visionary future there, and it sounds absolutely wonderful, of course, because I think the time has come for these technologies to be released. And also, I really believe that as we become more spiritual, we'll use less technology and find the ability to do these things within us. I know that, for instance, teletransportation is something that many saints in the past and Jesus himself were noted to have done. And, of course, this is something that as we purify our souls, so to speak, we'll be able to do more of these kinds of things. So it'll be interesting to see how new technology comes into play and works with higher consciousness that is also coming into play at this time in our society.
Well, I agree. Certainly, physical teleportation and spiritual teleportation are not mutually inconsistent. Spiritual teleportation has been manifest in some human individuals, some avatars, and in many more ordinary individuals during moments, for example, of survival crisis. And so clearly it's either a latent or an incipient faculty of the human race to will yourself to another point in time-space. In fact, I took an account from a woman in Santa Fe who had her skull fractured in an automobile accident and actually reached her mother's house in less time than she did when she later had a full recovery from her head injury and began running marathons and couldn't run between the accident location and her mother's residence in the time that she basically spiritually teleported there under survival crisis. Now, we can't rely, however, on spiritual teleportation at our level of development because it's not something that the mass public can turn on and off. Because if it was, then people wouldn't get in a car or on a train or on their bicycle to get from their home to, let's say, their place of employment in the morning. You know, they would just sit on their front stoop and then will themselves to their office. So we want to increase human potential, but at the same time, simultaneously, we want to increase net societal potential so that we use resources more efficiently, we have less impact on the environment, and we facilitate a better life for the ordinary person. That's what's uplifted society, historically speaking. I mean, we take the cost of transportation for granted, but look at the cost, for example, of commercial air flight. You're cramped in a tube with all those other people breathing all those viruses and bacteria for several hours. There's the danger of blood clots, of damage to babies in their mothers as a result of birth defects resulting from radiation at that altitude. There's a host of medical problems and just general societal dysfunction that can occur from air flight, in addition to the crashes that occur that kill and maim people, that while not completely eliminated by teleportation, will be largely obviated. So the question is, if you have a more efficient form of transport that's already emerged in your civilization, do you need to implement it? And I think the answer is yes. We can't remain stuck in the 70s for another century. We don't have the room to put a 13th, a 14th, a 15th lane on the San Diego freeway. We're running out of space. We're certainly approaching the limits to growth in watersheds, maybe not orthographically across the vast expanse of the earth, but in areas where there is available water, we are approaching the limits to growth. And therefore, we have to do things with less inputs of time, energy, and material.
Indeed. Well, you know, I like the idea of it going hand in hand, and I have to ask why these technologies haven't come to the forefront of the regular human experience at this point. And I personally feel it really does come down to when essentially we get the government that we deserve, and when we want to live life unconsciously and be babied and just expect everything to be given to us, then we eventually get something where we don't live a life that's nearly as fulfilling as it can be when we enter into working on ourselves and working on our awareness and becoming fully more conscious of our world and becoming more involved, like you would like to, Andrew, in our government, in our communities. And I really see that technology itself, it might go the other way before it gets back into the release of these great technologies for people. I almost wonder if the technologies won't need to be reinvented in some way from regular folks rather than however they've been building these technologies in secret, which certainly, as you were referring to ET involvement, may have some of that involved. And I'm wondering, perhaps we're headed for a time when we're going to move back into community, into resilience, into connecting with our neighbors, to even perhaps sometimes grow food in community gardens and create energy structures that work in our particular community and start to create resilience independent of this giant system right now that has, in some ways, been sucking the lifeblood out of the people, and certainly financially, that's definitely been happening. So just some options to keep aware of, and I'm really grateful for the sharing of the 2013 vision, because I know we're not going to have that. I know we're going to move into this golden age in a beautiful way. We're moving into a whole new way of being, and it's a really exciting time to be here, and it's exciting that you're breaking out with these really expansive experiences for us all to grow with.
Well, yeah. Well, thank you, Michael. I have my own take on it. I think that the reason that these technologies have not emerged naturally in society is because we're living under a dysfunctional government that, in fact, does not rise to the standard of the people. I mean, we're being governed by secrecy, and yet most people in society are living their lives at a much higher level of transparency and authenticity. So I think it really is a crisis of authentic government. I do agree that we're going to have to take responsibility for independent development of the devices and to really personally lead the revolution in sustainability. But look at one issue in sustainability, permaculture. There's a vast investment of land in the existing transportation infrastructure. So if we can begin to break up some airports, some train stations and rail lines, and some highways, and cultivate that land for food production, that will be made possible with the introduction of teleportation. We wouldn't have to dismantle the entire road system, but we'd be able to largely dismantle, for example, airports. Imagine Los Angeles International Airport becoming a much smaller teleport with maybe one airstrip remaining in place to service people's transportation needs for those who can't teleport, let's say the elderly and the infirm, those who might be unable to teleport. But imagine the rest of that large area there in Playa del Rey, which was an historical wetland. Imagine that being returned to wetland or to a permaculture, or an organic garden feeding all of the poor people of Los Angeles. I mean, there's a huge investment in land that we take for granted. So I think that these kinds of improvements in society have to go on at both the public governmental and then the public-private, the personal level simultaneously. So I think that they'll work ultimately hand in glove in the sense that private initiatives in sustainability will be advanced by creating a government that the American people truly deserve, which is one that's based on truth and on progressive implementation of life-advantaging technology rather than on secrecy and deception and the sequestration of technologies that could literally transform the world, and that we should be leading the world in introducing, and we're not. And the tragedy is that we have a number of these technologies available, and we're not implementing them. And I think that goes contrary to the great history and traditions of our country.
Yes, it does, and we have definitely lots of technology out there that's been released, and people simply aren't able to get it forth because someone buys out the patents and then they squash it or hide it. I mean, I've heard so many stories of technologies that have been released and then they disappear and we never use it and it never comes to anything, and it certainly doesn't benefit society. So you have a great view of all of this, and certainly it's interesting that you're thinking of running for president, and maybe you can tell us just a little bit more about that and where you're coming from.
Well, I've decided to run. I'm going to be running for the Democratic nomination. I'm a Washington Democrat. I'm not really running necessarily to win. In other words, I don't have a keen desire for the office, but I'm running as a figure in the truth movement based on my personal conviction that our authentic republic has been co-opted and captured by the CIA. You know, we prided ourselves in being more advanced and democratic than the former Soviet Union, but my reading of the Cold War is actually that we won the Cold War because we had more subversion of our society by sophisticated intelligence activities than less. And so I'm going to be running in all 50 states for the Democratic nomination. It's going to be a citizens campaign. I'm going to try to run as an antidote to conventional politics. I'm going to publish an extensive platform on the Internet and a series of YouTubes introducing myself to the American people, and I'm just going to let the chips fall where they may. I'm not going to attack my opponents. I'm going to keep my statements focused on where the country has been, where it is, and where I think it needs to go, and then just let people make their own decision. But, I mean, we really are in a constitutional crisis here because as long as we continue to elect basically CIA operatives to the White House, we're going to continue to get this insider game based on cronyism and a sort of a quiet contempt for the American people. And I'm going to articulate what happened that caused that crisis in government to come about. So I'm running. I've decided to run. I'm going to take the long view of it and basically, you know, pursue the long game because I think that we need a national dialogue on the fact that the United States government has shown itself incapable of galvanizing the energies of the people and really implementing our historical mission in this time. And people could go into more immediate political controversies regarding President Obama's, the circumstances of his nationality or identity or what have you. But I think the broader issue is that we're seeing the election of career intelligence insiders, and that ultimately, immediately, is subversive of what our republic was supposed to be. And I'm not saying that I'm some great personage in history, but I'm going to be running authentically as an individual and not as an apparatchik of either the traditional parties or of the intelligence community. It's my position that the presidency has been subverted, and I'm going to articulate to the audiences that I'm going to be speaking to why that's happened and what we should do to rectify it. But it's a serious crisis, and I will be making serious allegations about the last four presidents, two of them being Republican and two of them being Democrats. So I'm not going to be speaking in partisan political terms. But to the extent that three of them remain very young men, I think they're going to be confronted with the true circumstances regarding their emergence as powerful individuals, particularly the last three. In fact, you know, George H.W. Bush had held many offices. He had been a congressman. He had been our ambassador to China. He'd been the chairman of the Republican Party, while also being the director of Central Intelligence. But his son, George W. Bush, Bill Clinton, and Barack Obama are individuals from the baby boom generation who are more identifiable literally as intelligence assets who reached the White House. And that, I think, has led to the stagnation that we've seen. They have basically ruled based on secrecy and manipulation of the population, which is the mindset of secrecy in government, rather than recognizing that the presidency is a bully pulpit, you know, as Washington understood it, as the Roosevelts understood it, as Kennedy understood it, even as Reagan understood it. And so we're getting apparatchiks. We've got these intelligence Politburo members who have become chief executive, and I think that's been to the detriment of the country. So I'm going to call them to answer my position that, in fact, their emergence politically they owed to their activities on behalf of the Central Intelligence Agency. So in that discussion, I'm going to try to present to the American people what we can do to try to rectify the situation and restore authenticity at the highest reaches of our government.
Well, that's certainly something to look forward to. I know you have an event coming up where you're going to be talking about your experiences with a young President Obama on some of the Mars missions. Is what you're going to be sharing some of that. Is that correct?
Right. I'm going to be speaking at the Awakening Center in Rainier, Washington, throughout the day of February 25th with my esteemed colleague Alfred Lambermont Weber. And Alfred's going to be canvassing everything we know about the controversy regarding President Obama's background. And then I'm going to narrate my interactions with a young Barry Soetoro in the Jump Room program of the early 1980s and provide all of my interactions with him during the early 80s and what those interactions indicate. And then after lunch, Alfred is going to interview me about this linkage between the secret activities of the defense technical community and President Obama and the other presidents, what the CIA knew about the identity of these presidents, and how that's affected the presidency over the last 25 years. And then we're going to take questions from the audience. So it should be a good opportunity to really explore a specific case, kind of a case study of secrecy in government. This is going to be sort of prescript to the emergence of our third whistleblower, who is an individual who investigated the Jump Room program and who's going to corroborate the involvement of myself, President Obama, as a young man named Barry Soetoro, and Regina E. Dugan, who is the director of DARPA. So we're going to elaborate and extrapolate on some of that information that I first announced with William Stillings in November of last year. Our understanding has grown, and I think we have an important piece of the puzzle of who Barack Obama actually is. And so I would urge my fellow Washingtonians and others in the Northwest and in British Columbia to attend that event, because we're really going to try to define what exists in the background of President Obama that's caused this cover-up of his actual identity and activities.
Well, that sounds interesting. Certainly looking forward to hearing some of that stuff revealed, and the collaborating witnesses and whistleblowers, I'm sure, will be powerful. Yeah, and we had a question earlier about, well, I'm just kind of curious, what do you think would happen if people started to, we had time travel technology, and just an example of someone going back in the past, and, well, this particular one was kind of a joke, but she said, well, if I want to put spikes under my demon brothers, she called them, because I don't think she gets along with her brother very well, car at a certain time or whatnot. So what would happen if we did, how does that work? How could I possibly go back in time, influence the past in some way that changes the present, and come back to the present and then remember both times, whereas the other people, I guess, wouldn't? I mean, how would that work? What do you think?
Well, that really is asking me to solve the dilemma that's known in quantum physics as the grandfather's paradox. And actually, the way to conceive of that is that in the present, when you decide to go back and affect the past, when you are there in that location that before you left, you called the past, which is now the present, if you affect causation of events at that point in time-space, then that event is brought forward in time because you've affected reality in the present. So in fact, the future that you left when you decided to go back to the past was already affected by that intervention. And in that sense, you can't go back to the past to change the past. You can only go back to the past to fulfill the past. If you go back to the past and try to change the past and create the retrocausally create the causality for the future, you can't change the future if the future you left doesn't have the results of that causation. So in the case of where you would go back and literally kill an ancestor like your father or grandfather, you can try to do so, but the mere fact that you exist in the future to attempt it means that in all your attempts to go back and do so, you can't succeed. But you can go back in the past and fulfill events that and have the causation from those events carry forward in time and affect the future. So, for example, you can go back and intervene in an historical event, change its direction, be photographed as I was at Gettysburg in 1863, and then that information can come forward. But it can't come forward in a way where it obviates the conditionality of the future, because essentially if you had changed the past in the past, you'd be living in a different future. So if that future involves your non-existence, you can't exist to go back and kill your father or grandfather. But in policy terms, we're not going to be bedeviled so much by the grandfather's paradox as the negative and positive and negative capabilities of the two major interventions in time-space that we can achieve, which I would cabin in gross terms under the term teleportation and chronovision. Let's call teleportation every form of time travel or quantum access where you're literally tunneling through the time-space continuum, either to reach a real-time destination or a destination with some offset into the past or future. Now, that's going to be highly beneficial to modernize transportation in real time. Whereas, for example, somebody on the East Coast of the United States could teleport in the morning to Paris, lunch in Paris, go to several museums in the afternoon, and teleport home, to eat dinner in Long Island, okay? So real-time teleportation is going to become the norm. But in a civilization with 7 billion individuals, we can't use the different forms of teleportation to allow individuals to time travel because that would begin to interfere in the stability of the time-space continuum. It would create more chaos of events retrocausally, and that's something we just don't want to go there. It's sort of a toxic outcome in the time-space continuum. So there is going to have to be government intervention in the area of teleportation. We're going to have teleports that are secured just like airports. There may have to be some kind of military defense posture at the respective teleports to prevent armies jumping through the teleports. And we're going to have to use it only for real-time transport because we can't, for example, allow people to teleport to the future, find out what stock they should invest in, and then jump back to the past and have that financial opportunity that no one else would have. So that would create social chaos in the present. If we allowed mass people to engage in mass teleportation, it would create mass social chaos. In chronovision, we have the opportunity to create virtual museums and libraries where instead of going and seeing fancy oil paintings of auspicious past events, we could literally see moving holograms of them. And I think that would work a revolution in science and learning if, for example, we could introduce school children to history by showing them moving images of past events. At the same time, because chronovision allows for the capture of private activity on a non-local basis, it presents a threat to one of the most cherished social values, which is privacy. And so chronovision would also have to be subject to reasonable government restraints because we don't want to allow it to become an avenue for mass invasion of privacy, either by the government itself or by individuals invading the privacy of other individuals. So there's both great opportunities and great dangers presented by these technologies, and that's another reason why I'm speaking out, because this is the direction civilization will be going in the 21st century, and we should really start to do some deep thinking about what the policy implications are.
Right. I'm glad that you're considering all this because that is the case, that for everything that goes forward, there's going to be I think it's called there's a back to every front or a front to every back.
Right.
So anything that goes forward is to have that back side, that opposing force that seems to cause an issue in a negative way. You move in this direction and you don't think about what happens as the back to the front, but there always is one. So it sounds like you're considering all those things, and that's good, and I'm glad to hear that. This has been a really fascinating discussion with you, Andrew, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Is there anything that you'd like to talk about as we come to a close in the next few minutes? I think we have about...
I would like to address sort of where my truth campaign is going. For those who've been following it, I think people have understood that I was trying to share my experiences so that the truth would emerge. Not necessarily my unitary truth, not my singular truth, but so that I would be a catalyst for the emergence of other whistleblowers. And so I'm going to be bringing the next whistleblower forward. I'm facilitating it, even though his interpretation of what the jump rooms were doing is contrary to mine. And so I just want to underscore that this has been a quest for the truth, not for me to arrogate my truth, but to say, look, I want to be a catalyst so that people who are in possession of this secret information have the courage to come forward without fear or favor and know that there's strength in numbers, and that they can share what they know with the people of America and the world, so that society in general understands this information and realizes that literally the infrastructure of the future emerged in the U.S. defense culture of 40 years ago, and it's stuck there. We need to go in and rescue it and apply it practically through a broad program of technology transfer in the present. But I just want to underscore the fact that I'm not going to suppress this witness. I'm, in fact, facilitating his emergence publicly, because he has an entirely different theory as to particularly what the jump room is doing. He believes, for example, that we weren't going to Mars, but we were going somewhere else. And so I'll let him articulate that when he steps forward. But, I want all those who have criticized me, who have said, well, this has all been your unilateral claims, not one scintilla of proof. That's not the case. I've presented hundreds of facts that can be investigated by anybody, but I've also brought forward now 2 witnesses who were direct participant witnesses who have agreed to become whistleblowers, and that's William B. Stillings of the Jump Room program, and now this individual who was literally dropped into the Jump Room program in 1980 so that he could investigate it for the intelligence community. But I'm not going to censor him just because he has a different understanding about what we were doing with these technologies. I want this debate, this discussion to go forward, and I want to see as many whistleblowers come forward as possible so that we can really achieve a broad societal understanding of what these secret technologies are and what their potentials are and what their dangers are. And so this is literally going to happen in the next several weeks or months. This individual is going to step forward, and I think everybody will be fascinated by who he is. They'll see that I've been telling the truth all the time because, I've been talking about being a kid who was dropped in to the U.S. time-space program by his engineer father. This person was literally a top investigator for the intelligence community. He was literally serving with basically presidential authority. He was ultimately an assistant to the president investigating these programs, and a quite heroic individual at that. He actually rescued several people. So we're really at the point where my truth campaign is prevailing because I ended up being a catalyst for other people coming forward, and I celebrate that, and I'm deeply grateful for Brett and for this new individual who will be coming forward soon, because they really stepped up and fulfilled their moral duty and their duty to our country to help liberate these technologies on behalf of the great civilization that we are. We should be leading the effort to promote beneficial technologies and progressive economic and societal development around the world, not become a warrior nation that's known as just, the paratrooper coming from the sky to come in and kill your family. And I'm deeply disturbed by the fact that we've left our historical tradition of being the city on the hill, a city that adopted only a defensive military posture, and we've become a warrior nation that instead of seeking the betterment of society is seeking the military occupation of other countries. I think that's sick. I think it's immoral. And I think ultimately the truth movement is going to be the historical movement where we address that and we correct the U.S. government and put it back on the benevolent path that it was on after our founding and, during the first almost 200 years of its existence. We've lost our way, and I want to help our country find our way again.
Well, certainly it is the truth that sets us free, and I personally am very grateful to all those who step forward with revealing things that maybe are pretty hard at first to start to state in the collective mind. Guys like David Icke started many, many years ago saying things that seemed pretty wild to a lot of people, but he stuck to it over the years, and now more and more people are understanding a different way of looking at the world, and you're doing the same, and I'm encouraging certainly many others to step forward and start sharing your stories and their stories now. It's really time for the truth to be known. All that is hidden will be revealed is the prophecy, and that's a prophecy that I'm sticking with. I feel we're actually creating that one, and that's what we're here to do, is create a better world, create a better timeline, create a divine way of being, and know the power is within us regardless of the outer system. Karma is reality, and it will cycle back to those who create negative karma. It's just a matter of time. So it's really up to us to now realize the powers within to create this new kind of world we're all envisioning in our own way, and for our own peace and purpose of the puzzle to manifest for all to see. So I'm really grateful, Andrew, for you joining us here today. It's been a great conversation. Love to have you back sometime, maybe with some of your the other people that are coming out and that you're going to be corroborating the stories with, and it's been nice. So thanks a lot. And maybe you can let us know where to get where people can find you and track your progress as we go here.
Well, my time travel website, projectpegasus.net. I think I might have mentioned I'm about two years behind posting my TV and radio interviews, and I apologize for that. I've just been too busy. What I would urge your listeners to do is join my Facebook group, Project Pegasus, because that's where our discussion of the net opportunities and dangers presented by time travel is going on in an active way. And I also have, I founded the Mars Anomaly Research Society, so we have a Mars site at projectmars.net, and there, under the Annals of Mars, we're publishing our Mars monographs, where we show our findings of what we're finding in NASA's images from the red planet. So, I'm really excited. We're living in a time of true apocalypse, and I'm very hopeful. One thing I might just end with is, we have to recognize that while all of us are mortal, we all possess an eternal soul. And it's my conviction as a student of history that people and groups that have had a positive effect on society have been those who have recognized that, they can kill your body, but they can't kill your soul. You think of people like Martin Luther King. I mean, he clearly went forward with his cause to establish racial equality in the United States and the world, not without fear, but in a fearless way. And what I'm heartened by is the fact that many people are emerging in society with that consciousness, the consciousness that you can't cling greedily to life. You have to have the courage of your convictions and move forward knowing that in the pursuit of your mission in life, you may lose your life, but that ultimately you will be provided for and that you shouldn't live in fear of that outcome. In fact, all of us have to face physical mortality. We're mortal beings. But ultimately, our consciousness, our essence cannot be destroyed. It has always existed. And that's, I think, sort of both the perennial philosophy, the Masonic philosophy, and even the perennial philosophy that guided the founders of our country. There were people who were confident that they could lose their life in pursuit of breaking away from England and establishing a new republic, but they did so because they recognized that it's what their generation needed to do. And what I'm heartened by, what I'm hopeful about, is that I'm seeing this kind of spirit in this new revolutionary generation that's emerging, and understanding that, the perennial philosophy teaches, and it's self-evident, that we survive mortal death, and that whether it involves assassination or, let's say, dying in a plane crash on the way to an important meeting, we have to live as fearlessly as possible, and that a revolutionary isn't somebody who doesn't experience fear. A revolutionary is somebody who pursues positive societal change despite fear, somebody who casts fear aside and says, okay, this is what I'm going to try to achieve. And that's, I think, what you see in people like David Icke or Governor Jesse Ventura or Ron Paul. A new leadership cadre is emerging of fearless individuals. And I think that's great. I think that's...
thanks for sharing that. And we're really supportive of Ron Paul on this show, and I'm looking forward to doing some shows on liberty in the near future. Socrates had a quote that to the people that were about to poison him, essentially, he said, well, they can kill me, but they can't hurt me. And that's the understanding of the eternal nature, the eternal now of our being. That being said, we are headed into a different way of being now, in a different age, and the cycles have changed. So it's no longer about being killed for the truth. It's now about being the light of the world. And one thing we talk about on this radio show a lot, and we do on Saturdays, is we work with Archangel Michael. It's something we really encourage everyone to start to understand about protection and about the angelic realm, that Archangel Michael is humanity's protector and can protect not only in the emotional realm, in the mental realm, but very much in the physical realm as well. And there are certain God science ways that Archangel Michael has released for people to start creating that daily momentum with him. So that's something to consider as well, is that it's time to be the light of the world and be the truth and be protected. Put on the armor of the divine and know there's more to life than the material, and the power really is in the spiritual. So that's something to maybe think about as well.
Right. Well, that's a wonderful way of stating it and of thinking about it. Right. Living to be a light onto the world, and that's the phenomenon that I'm seeing in more and more people. People are waking up and they're becoming aware and they're taking responsibility for their own truth. And in the case of the American people, they simply want a government that they deserve, because I think individual people are operating on a higher level of consciousness than the government itself is. And it's difficult for large organizations to do what small groups of individuals and what individuals can do. And yet I think that people are really stepping up and beginning to think and speak and act in a truthful way because of an understanding that that's their authentic self. And that's very positive.
Very much. Well, once again, thank you, Andrew, and people can always tune into this radio show. Once again, it's blogtalkradio.com/FOTWAY, and we're going to continue down the search for truth in all of the different venues that may come our way, and we're really grateful to have connected with this mind-expanding topic and you, Andrew, today. So we'll see you next time on
Certainly.
Radio.
Thank you very much, Michael. Have a great night. Rhonda, take care. It was wonderful being on the show with you, and I really appreciate it, and I look forward to coming back.
Definitely. I really enjoyed it, and now we're going to love to see you back soon.
Well, I'll try to bring Brett and our new whistleblower. They're both very heavy dudes, and our new whistleblower has a phenomenal story to tell, and it's true, and he's going to be able to identify who he is and what he did and why he knows what he knows. So my truth campaign is only going to get louder, so stay tuned.
All right, well, bring it on. We're ready for you, and looking forward to it. Well, thanks a lot, and everyone have yourself a very inspired evening, working yourselves onto a divine timeline, a beautiful the way of being for us all that we're all headed into as we are co-creating a new Earth. And we'll see you next time on Followers of the Way.